Welcome, everyone, to what is sure to be an amazing episode of the Untethering Shame podcast. If you're already familiar with my guest, then you know why. But if you're meeting him for the first time, let me introduce you to Dr. Steve Amefuna. I've known Steve for almost 10 years, which is crazy. As I'm saying this out loud, I'm looking you in the eye for that. You're having the same reaction. Okay, good. So essentially, our lives have changed a lot over the course of that time. But in those 10 years, there's been this consistency, this beauty of who he is and how wonderful it is whenever Steve is in your presence. Steve and Jordan were in medical school together. And even as we all went our separate ways, him finishing his residency in Baltimore, Jordan and I out here in Portland, Oregon, I can honestly say that my love and connection to him as a person has continued, even if distance and time makes the connection look different, feel different than it did before. Steve's the kind of person that immediately lights up a room. He wants everyone to feel seen and special and goes out of his way to do so. He loves fitness, music of every style and genre, and goldfish, which he really specifically wants to make sure you know is the pet, not the snack. And I've watched it. I watched him when he talked about cleaning his tank. He takes so much pride in being a fish dad. It is something that if you are feeling stumped on a conversation point, just bring up fish and you're covered for hours. Steve's also a performer, and beyond his smile, wit, and endless musical talent, knows how to show up in a space to only be seen in the ways he wants. He has defenses and protection mechanisms that aren't hard to get past, but they take a willingness to look a little deeper. I often joke that I don't like the Steve that everyone else got to be around when we were together. Maybe it was the therapist in me, or maybe the recognition of a fellow performer, but I always wanted to see the real him. And I fell in love with that raw and honest version as soon as I was given that opportunity and gift to know him. Steve was born in Nigeria and immigrated to New Jersey when he was 4 years old. He has strong connections to his family and culture back in Nigeria and has, like many people who have immigrated here, felt the tension and pull between two cultures where, sure, some overlap exists, but there are also so many nuances, which makes the process of knowing oneself even more complicated. Who are you? What do you believe? What have you been told? And how does that differ depending on where you are geographically? What are your goals? What identities or parts are celebrated, feared, rejected, depending on the hat you have on? Can you break the norms set before you, whether it's cultural or familial? And how do you make sense of that when you have pulls from both collectivistic and individualistic cultures? Can you reconcile different halves to become one person? Can you find balance? And can you share that full person with another without the pressure to conform coming in at every turn? So with that, Steve, I'm pumped to get into this conversation. Mostly, I wouldn't want to talk goldfish for 30 minutes, but pretty much any other topic, just to have you on, I'd be excited. So welcome. I'm so glad that you're here.
What an introduction. Thank you. It is amazing. And believe it or not, my fish tank was the topic of my most recent appointment with my therapist. So
so you're just saying at some point, maybe that's something you have to explore.
You're lost.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's on me. Yeah.
That's really where the good stuff is.
Yeah. I love it. So one of my favorite things to do, I mean, you know this, we both thrive, again, I think on real conversations. And one of the things I like to do just to center the conversation is to have each of us do a one-word check-in. So I'm curious for you, what is one word that you would use to describe how you feel right now?
You know, I recently, I think, arrived at this word myself. I found that I was using it more often in just my regular check-ins with people in my world. That word is overwhelmed. And it's not necessarily something that I'm unfamiliar with, but I think as I get older, I'm able to sort of get a pulse of, my internal feelings and kind of there's this depth of reflection that's definitely grown. And so I'm like processing that feeling through, new lenses and that's what comes to mind.
Okay, I said we'll both check in, so I'll give you my word, and then I have a question, a follow-up question about this, because there's so much to what you just said that I think is key. I think my word right now is vibrating. I have a lot of energy, a lot of excitement. I'm just pumped to be talking to you for so many reasons, a 3-hour time difference being one of them. It's just hard to connect. And you and I both having such a degree of sort of constant movement and hustle. And even though we love talking and conversations with each other, but also just like anybody literally who gives us some nonverbal supports. Yeah. It's just hard. It's hard to do that. So I have that, but also I think maybe a lot of different things moving through me. So hearing you say that, I'm interested because, I've known you for, I don't know, a little under a third of your life. When you describe that feeling of kind of this pulse, this getting a knowing, you've been somebody that's moved at a rapid rate since I met you. And my guess is that was happening well before I knew you. And so is the overwhelm, is the naming more of a kind of coming to understand how your life construction has been affecting you? Or is this something, is it a difference? Is it some sort of shift in maybe how it's affecting you, how it's sitting with you, what your life looks like now versus then?
I think it's definitely the latter. This is a very there are a lot of arcs in my story and my timeline that have been going on for 10 plus years, right? And I'm graduating from residency, and I think I'm like taking this very distinct step from one part of my life to another. And I think that, I've been sort of working towards this point for months, years, and that looks and involves a lot of like very arguably separate things, right? Like I just moved into this new place with my girlfriend, and it's like the first time that I've had my own like space in my own home to build, which is amazing, right? A little overwhelming. I have this test. I graduate. My graduation party is June 3rd, so I'm planning that, and very joyous. I'm doing a joint graduation with 2 of my classmates, and so that is going to be a lot of fun, but overwhelming. And the sort of day-to-day hustle of residency, and I think just sort of finding ways to not, really to not fall off in any direction. And I think a lot of that looks like realizing that I can't do everything at once, and sort of taking it piece by piece, and the shame that comes from not being able to, I feel like, represent myself well in all of these different directions. And so, it's like, I'm human. I can only do what I can do. And I think that, again, I've been in this position, but, through medical school or whatever, but now there's just like, there's new language and perspective that I understand it.
Well, and you're about to take this, what feels like a giant leap off a giant cliff, where you are the attending. I went through this with Jordan. Obviously, I didn't go through this. I indirectly went through this by being the partner of somebody getting to that place where like, shit, like it's on me now. Like I'm the one that's, doing these things. And so there is, every step of your career trajectory, and we'll just stay in the silo of career for a second and expand it back out. You've been working towards something that's had unknowns, but a certain degree of knowns. And even moving into attendinghood, there's a certain degree of knowns, but there's a difference in sort of the cognitive unknowns. There's a lot of mental, emotional shifts and changes. And that's a lot. It's a lot to handle. And there's sort of this, hope you made the right choice the last X number of years, because as much as you've been working your butt off, like, this is it. Like, this is where you're going to be. So there's that too of, that. And then on top of that, there's this, all these different places and people and connections. And you are, I said it, I know in the intro, but it's a true statement about you. And when you are connected to people, you want everyone to feel seen. And that includes your patients, that includes your family, that includes your partner, that includes your friends. And I've watched you over the years. You used to struggle with it in a different way. Like it was almost like you could see the sort of frenzied way you're trying to be there for everyone at all points. And over the years, you become more focused in, look, I got this one watering can and I've got 75 plants that I want to water. Or maybe it's, I've got one container of fish food and 75 fish bowls. You can only do one at a time. And if you just take the whole can of fish food and just start chugging it into all 75, they're all going to die. It's like they're too much food, not enough food, whatever's going to happen. My plant example felt like it was going to be a little bit more concrete, but I did that little audible to the goldfish one. So hopefully that's landing, but it's that. And so you're having to reconcile. For the rest of your life, you're going to be learning how to do this, but with new aspects of yourself. And how do you deal with the sort of grieving and reconciliation with the fact that you're always going to feel a little overwhelmed because you're always going to feel like you can't give 100% in every direction. And that is a value to you. And so how do you kind of integrate those two realities?
Yeah, I think some of it is, I think some of it happens outside of my control, right? Like I still do 24-hour calls or whatever. And after a string of just like less sleep or not as good sleep, or I'm just like overworking myself, I like inevitably will crash. And I'm like, well, we just have to, have to take a break. And, I think for me, tying in fitness, like that's usually, I always make time for that. Right. And so that's my like non-negotiable. And I think having, in a weird way, like having that to sort of center myself on helps add the stability. And like, honestly, no matter what's going on, this is a break and I can, whatever it was that I was hyperfixating on leading up to this, I can decide to continue it. I can start doing something else. And your point about a little bit at a time is definitely true. I think time's going faster, and it doesn't actually feel like I have more time, but I think that I'm sort of entering a point in my life where there are a lot of these, like, I don't want to say generic, but along the maturity line sort of things that are happening, living with a partner, sort of job. And it's sort of like the ride is going without, I feel like I have less control over, like, I'm like I have, I'm here. Maybe these things that I thought about far in the future, I'm here. And I think you're right. I definitely appreciate how now that I am here, there is a lot, but I've grown to just accept. And honestly, I think I don't give myself enough credit sometimes. That's definitely something that Eliza, who I don't think you've actually met, maybe we've faced someone.
Only on the phone. Yeah.
Something that she's really good about always reminding me is like, it doesn't seem to you maybe like you're doing enough in each category, but that's just because that's the voice that keeps you going, and that you've always sort of is some aspect of your motivation. And so that feeling of overwhelmness actually is, I think, slowly dissipating as I just kind of accept. And I think that maybe that is how I hopefully will be able to continue to deal with it. I don't think it's over. I can see how it's going to manifest in the future, but this is like the time to practice, and so far so good.
Yeah, I had that point when I was pregnant with Ev, and I was like, shit, do I want this? I can't take her back now. Like, the stick turned pink. I peed on a lot of them. We're here. And it was that same feeling of, and I knew, I made a conscious decision. I had the privilege, and I think the non-privilege. My OB kind of made the joke to me of, she's like, I'm not saying this is the way to go, but I got pregnant on accident in med school. I was so busy, I forgot to take my meds, and I got pregnant. And I'm not saying that's the way to go. I'm also recognizing there's a lot of pain in people's stories to getting pregnant. There's depth to all of this, which we would need an hour just to lay out all the complexities of everybody else's journey to get there. But she also said sometimes I think for people, there's sort of the curse of planning everything, because you have this idea that there's a time you feel like an adult where there's a certain degree of calmness where you're ready for the next thing, but that never happens. And so when I was pregnant with her and I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do? And then we had her. And then a week later, we had a pandemic. And then I'm realizing I don't really want to practice in the therapy room anymore. So can I completely uplift my career and go full force into my own business? Jordan's, finishing residency. And it felt like what you're describing. The ride is moving. I don't know if I fit on this ride. I don't know if I like this ride. I don't know. Yeah. What do you do? Can you stop it? Yeah. And I will say, and I think this is something I hope that more people talk about when and if they're around kids and in a parent or caregiver role, it sucks for a while in the beginning. Like, they are fucking cute when they're somebody else's, but she didn't sleep for 6 months. And so I was losing so much of who I was and what I thought my life was going to look like. And so I'm connecting this now to this. There are all these check marks that you're sort of getting, residency's wrapping up, you're moving in with your partner, you found somebody that helps you feel seen, safe, and heard, that you want to do the work with. These are the goals. They're the things we've been working towards.
Right.
And again, you've got this, this, do I want this ride? Is this the right ride? And that's a normal, very necessary thing. I remember when I talked about, in Jordan's and mine, we have our regular weekly meetings and we'll bring up things like divorce. How do we know if we want to stay together? What would happen if we did get divorced? How do we manage things with Everly? And my mom used to panic. And I'm like, gosh, but if we don't make the choice to choose each other every day, it's that feeling you're describing. Things move too fast and you don't get to recenter. So as I'm hearing all this, I'm relating to this. I'm also adding in this component that I don't understand, which is your experience of existing in two worlds and multiple layers of two worlds throughout most of your life. And so how does that factor into the hustle, the overwhelm? And I'm also curious how that factors into that voice that you have of essentially you're never doing enough. You need to keep going.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just thinking about this because in so many ways, right? So how did it impact me? I think I just from a very young age was just learned how to code switch, right? I existed in all of these different sort of realms and occupied all these different roles and was expected to be a certain person. And who I was expected to be was, interspersed with who I was in a different. So it from very early on, I was just like, okay, well, this is how this is how I best show up in this situation. This is how I best show up in this situation. And I think that that made it easy, sure, to fit in and be in social situations. But like you described, I had this face that I put on. And I think that I realized that face exists everywhere, right? Including with my family. And so there's this at least in my mind, there's this list of things that I'm supposed to be. And as a Nigerian son, I'm supposed to be successful. I'm supposed to respect my elders. I'm supposed to marry a Nigerian girl. And I think that for a long time, I was sort of relying on that duality, which is beneficial in some situations, but not in all. And I think this was a situation in which I realized that it maybe wasn't so beneficial, but it's not so easy to, because for a long time I was just kind of who I thought my parents wanted me to be. And I think that there's a lot of reconciliation, within me that's been going on, and it's kind of accepting that, I'm fine the way that I am, and still finding a way to really genuinely have a relationship with my parents, because that really is important to me. And I've had really close family members pass away. And, I think also being in the healthcare field, right? I see families. There was, a family today who we heard stomach cancer isn't treatable. And so we just didn't do the operation. And, her dad was a pet. So I feel like that you realize as you get older, and I probably still have a long way to go and even more to realize, but life is super short. And I think when it comes to my parents and my relationship with them, I want to spend as much time with them. And honestly, even if it's painful for everybody involved, really start to show them who I am, and yeah, easier said than done.
Yeah.
Not that I'm doing anything crazy, right? It's like correct me if I'm wrong. I'm certainly not.
Well,
right? I think I'm a relatively normal person. So it's not like there's this big reveal, but I think that there are just these very ingrained reality and sort of personas that maybe I don't fit in as well as they want me to.
Yeah. Well, and I think so. Two things. Naming it, we know that's what it is. We know that it's code switching, but I think for people that haven't even heard that term before, don't quite know what it is. Many people do this a lot, and it happens more and more for people with identities that are often marginalized or oppressed in different systems. And so it's the idea of becoming someone different to kind of appease the oppressor in many ways and to make other people feel comfortable. And so it's being the charismatic and funny person that you can be because it makes other people feel safe. It's wearing certain clothes, acting a certain way. But it's also, again, acting away with your friends and then acting a certain way at home. And for you, that's kind of crossing different lines, different cultural norms too. And so having to carry all that. But what happens is, so we're all born, our brains need belonging on the same level that they need food, water, and shelter. Our bodies require it. We cannot function without it. And as we start to kind of figure out our way in the world, we start to take note of all the ways that, well, this person's treated differently than this person. I get praise from mom and dad when I bring home an A. I don't get any praise when I bring home a C. I get celebrated by my friends when I do this. I don't get celebrated this way. I'm treated a certain way when my body is very fit versus when my body is a fat body. You start to notice these things with yourself and with other people. So that lays the foundation for your shame rules, which is be this person, perform this way, and the world will accept you. And then you won't belong, but you are never going to anyways because you're a garbage human. Because that's what we believe is, see, look at all those check marks against us. So instead, you'll just fit in. You'll be a part of something. You'll be good enough. And so you start to do that, and that it's a confusion in our brain that fitting in is not the same as belonging. And I think the really tricky part is when your shame story and the shame rules overlap with or intersect with your values. And so, thinking about your family, you want to be a part of the space within your family unit, with your siblings, with your parents. You want them all to feel seen. You want them to be proud. You want to be somebody that is impacting and a part of kind of the raising up of the collective. But there's also the shame side of it. What happens if you don't? There's sort of hard and fast rules of what that means. And so you get comfortable hiding parts or performing in certain ways. And you were doing this, in other areas too, probably in romantic relationships, in friendships, in med school, in residency. And so even that description, like you are somebody with a value of going at it your all, whether it is, a night out dancing and with drinks and tons of fun, or residency and that one patient that just needs you to give them a little extra time. Like you want to always show up and give 100+%. But there are times that it's no longer your value. It's about your shame. And what would it mean if you didn't? And so there's, at least for me, the way I recognize it, it's a moving away from sort of a flexibility of, gosh, I want to be this person. Like I want to be the mom that always does X, Y, and Z. And sometimes I can't, versus shame saying, when you can't be that person, you suck, you failed. And you sort of carry that weight in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, That's kind of on the head. I think there is on that checklist in my I have two that I'm sure people have multiple, but there's a parallel of um, of all these little check boxes on the Western America, United States side, and then on the Nigerian, my family, my extended family. And obviously, I've had the um, I've had the fortune of being able to. I was born in Nigeria, but of going back, and so I. That's also like a very unique feeling. There was a sense of belonging that that was very much unlike anything I really ever felt. Just because in Nigeria, family doesn't necessarily move very far away from each other. So in my dad's village, there is like my uncle's mom, like all of his brothers are within a mile or two, and everybody there kind of grew up together. And my family's been there a long time, and so it's almost like you're related with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just such genuine joy at like seeing almost like a long lost relative. And, even though I've never met this person in my life, I feel the most complete and whole love ever. And so I want to embrace that more. Right. And I think as I get to, get to that next stage in my life where I'm also having kids, I want my parents to be there to sort of impact them. And I think right now the difficulty is just how to do that and how to accept that I am right. Like I sort of have to not sit in that shame. You're right. I should reframe it, but that's still what it feels like. Is I'm like, actually, I'm not who I want them, who they want me to be.
Right.
And I think that that's probably a battle I'll fight or a something that I'll struggle with for most of my life. And not that it's a bad thing or like insurmountable, but I think that it's just a long journey to true self-acceptance. And this is who I am, and that's okay.
Well, and I wonder too, even as you said that, I was thinking about, is it that you aren't who they want you to be, or is it you aren't who they have internalized messages about who you need to be? And so I think kind of that, like, that is their story coming in, and there's a degree of protection, honor, whatever it is around in that. And so really, again, kind of separating your parents. And I've had the opportunity to know your family and all of your family. I genuinely think that all of them are just trying to figure out what that means to love somebody. But there's a shift in showing love that is genuinely unconditional and given so freely, and love as a conditioned based response. And I think I'm going with a theory in my head here, and I've never articulated it out loud, so it might come out a little wonky. But one of the things I'm thinking about, even as you say that, is everybody that I've interviewed thus far. So 3 different people that are from other countries, other communities that are collectivistic, that are really rooted in the group, and everybody has a place. There's a different way of understanding belonging. When they've gone home, their experience of belonging, their experience of that feeling is almost exactly what you're describing. But here it's not. And I'm wondering if a big part of it is that a collectivistic culture and belief system can't thrive in an individualistic ideals. So the idea here of success looking very specific. So coming to the US, there's a degree of expectation of what success looks like that's rooted in a lot of United States culture and what it means to come over to the US and what it means to immigrate here and expectation. And so a lot of this is it's almost like an invisible packet that's handed down to families as soon as they get here of like, this is what your kids need to do. They've got 3 choices, doctor, lawyer. I don't even know what the third one would be, but that's it.
Pharmacist.
Yeah, maybe there you go. Pharmacist. And so it's
Yeah.
that piece, and it's that like their own process of like they're existing in two worlds, and
Yeah.
now the expectation they have.
And I think oftentimes these are careers that are very much, I don't want to use the word just demanding. I think that there's not involuntary, but there's almost like a mandatory. I always called it like a pound of flesh, and that looks different in each, all the different career paths, and having experienced the one in medicine, I think it's just I don't necessarily feel like my life is my own. Like I'm just this past Sunday I was working, right? And that's totally fair. Some years I've had Mother's Day off, and some years not. So there's nothing inherently wrong in the process. But I was very much looking forward to spending some time with my mom. I just told my parents that I moved in with my significant other. I think we need to schedule an entire different podcast for that.
Yep. I'm looking forward to that conversation too.
Yeah, just right. Put a pin in that.
Yeah.
And so like I really wanted to go home. I really wanted to. All my other siblings were home. I think my brother had told me we couldn't make it. But that's like something that I just accept. And I think to be not forced, but certainly strongly encouraged into one of these paths when you're handed that packet, regardless of who you are.
Yeah.
It is very stifling, and I don't want to be ungrateful. I'm very happy with what I've been able to accomplish, and a lot of that is due to the the programming of the Nigerian immigrant child. But I love singing, right? And I just wondered what could have been, and how differently could my life have looked, or how would that have played out, right? And I'm sure everybody has their what if career or what if path if their life had taken a different turn, but I think that in so many ways you're less able to even contemplate that, and there's a certain sense of loss, and there's certainly a individuality that is stifled.
Yeah, and it is this piece too of just, I think I've always struggled with the idea that when you're 18, you're an adult. And I struggled when I went into my master's program, and I was 26, 27. So it's not like I was like 40 and had a different life experience than a 22-year-old, but I did have 4 years, 5 years outside of school.
So Eliza starts PA school next week. And she went to her orientation.
Same thing.
It's exactly what she said. She was like, who are these kids? Like,
yeah. Well, and you feel this like, and I remember being like, okay, I get it. And on some degree, there's an element, I don't know if she had this too, but there's a little degree of shame. Like they got their shit together. They didn't waste 4 or 5 years. They're further along because the time pressure, I think, is really strong, particularly with women. I think because we have this like, we're reminded that our not so subtle messaging is like, your job is to birth a kid and want to be like a rock star mom, which again, that could be episode number 3 is talking about that and both of our experiences, understanding that. But there's this like, so you should know what you want to do and get your shit figured out. So then you can stop and do that. And then you got to figure out how to do both and stay successful in both, because we're going to judge you either way, no matter what you do. And so I had some degree of that, but then I also had this degree of, I wouldn't send any fucking person I know to anybody here. And not just because of age, but because of this idea of like, there's just an awareness about the world that shifts. And I just feel like we're asking people to hold to so much at such a young age. You're 22. I was a parent by the time I was like 8 years old, given all the trauma that I went through. I'm aware that people can be really young and be incredible, but why are we expecting that? And so I think part of what, and I don't know if this is true for you, but there's something I think about changing the idea of maybe not just like you're an adult or you're not an adult, but sort of when you start to come into yourself and start to, in a way, I guess, come home to yourself and recognize who you are. And I think through our 20s, there's a lot of performing that happens for different reasons. And so we can see, like you said, the sort of Nigerian immigrant family sort of programming, but there's the programming you've had in so many other layers as a person in this world too. And so now I think you're kind of coming to a place where you start to question it. And this is where I think genuine adulthood takes shape, as we start to go, I could keep doing this, but what's the cost? You know, like, am I okay with that? Because I'm suddenly aware of life in a different way. Time isn't forever. There is an infinite experience that we have of it when we're little. I've got all the time. I've got this. And now suddenly people die. The world changes. I'm feeling that pressure. Again, as a woman, part of it is ageism in our culture, and particularly against women. But part of it is also just, again, having experience like my grandma dying last year. I was like, what the fuck? Like, people in my head, I knew they wouldn't be here, but in my heart, I really thought they'd be here forever. And now I've got to make sense of that and ask myself, how do I want to move forward? And so I'm wondering, is that a part of it too? Of like, now I'm recognizing these pieces, these layers. I've got to make sense of it. I'm always going to have that certain degree of questioning, particularly with your parents, because that's always going to exist now, for better or for worse. But now you're figuring out your way in all these different layers, whether you chose them, you didn't choose them, you were forced down the path, you weren't forced down the path, they're your path now. How you evolve it, the choices moving forward are yours. But how all that comes together now with this knowingness that's changing, how you want to show up because of that awareness about yourself and the impact and sort of the domino of that into the world.
Yeah. I think that's probably, that's a summary of my own sort of personal and reflective journey the past 4 or 5 years. Maybe I'm just getting to that age, but I don't have as much energy as I did when I was 23, when I was 24. I was 25, 26, I have a 25-year-old brother who, I see that energy. I'm like, wow, I remember those days, but could be.
I feel it in my back just thinking about staying up past 11 o'clock. Yep.
Yeah. I fell. We had a bachelor party in New Orleans, and my brother knocked on the door to show me something on the phone. And in leaning out of the bathtub, I slipped and I fell. It didn't even it sounded old. It was like,
Yeah.
I was like,
oh yeah.
Are you okay? I was like, am I Forrest? Oh God. But I think there's also something very beautiful about that, because it's not necessarily, I've changed my perspective and not thought of it as a lessening of energy, but maybe a refinement. Right. And I am able to more finely sort of direct energy, and have had to develop the ability to more purposely direct energy into different aspects of my life. And this is just part of the process of figuring out what those things are.
Well, and I wonder too, that slowing down, that, your expectations being so high all the time. Part of this too, I think, is about recognizing that no matter how fast you moved, the needle was always moving faster. And so you are never going to feel like you have done enough to earn the love that you've been tethering to what you do and how you perform. And so instead, it's a reallocation of the energy towards, what does it look like if I accepted that there's a part of me that's always going to feel that way, radically, and fully accepted that, and instead said, and I'm going to love myself at 80%.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, I think with that acceptance comes the ability to love yourself at 100%. I think, once I once I like accepted and this goes beyond just, places where I didn't have enough energy, but maybe even the negative aspects of myself, right? The negative patterns I've shown in the past, the ways in which I've hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
Once I slowed down enough to really work on accepting those things, I feel like I was able to start to love and accept myself a little bit more, right? And maybe that translates to confronting that shame in myself. And it's kind of the place you have to start, and I think I have to genuinely accomplish that, or at least find a direction if I'm ever going to be able to accept that with my parents, right? And sort of apply those skills and that understanding to other aspects of my life.
Yeah, I think you gave us such a gift to wrap up on, which is the idea of, I think, integration of the self, loving the whole self, past, present, and future, but also really giving space to recognize that there's sort of a whole self for everybody else. And if you are constantly stringing your worth on what you do or don't do and how other people perform, you're also robbing yourself of the opportunity to love other people in full as well. And so once I've released the pressure for me to have to be a certain way, act a certain way, do certain things, hold on to certain things, all that, I love other people more. I stop having so much projected judgment onto them, of what they aren't doing or how they should show up, but instead just, gosh, you know what? They're doing the best they can. And I'll tell you, I have every fucking thought in my head about how I could do it better. I really do. And that will happen for the rest of my life. I have a righteous anger and a sense that I know better with 98% of the interactions. Sometimes I feel it right now. I feel a heat in me that sometimes I still think I'm right and I know it and everybody should just listen to me. But also that comes from my ego. That is my ego just longing to be seen, to say, oh no, you get it. You have value. And so instead it's saying, nobody needs to hear what I have to say. Doesn't mean I'm not valuable.
Isn't that true? Isn't that, you know what I'm saying? I
totally
come to the same conclusion. And it's interesting. I think that there's this, I feel like I'm always, like you said, the needle is always ahead. And I do feel like there is a part of me that's like, what if you just delve in, what if you took every opportunity to present and to and to really put your thoughts and all that out there. And I was immediately it's genuinely enough to me that I feel that it's genuinely enough to me that I feel that way, and that I know that. And you're right. It's not worth it to taste that needle. And I clearly still find opportunities to share my thoughts, and that is that's more than enough. It's a gift even.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, you already committed. We got to talk about moving in with our partners. We got to talk about dynamics within that, all sorts of other things. So you heard it here. I did not fake this. I am not good enough at audio and AI and all those things to make this happen. Steve's coming back. So we're going to have this conversation at some point. This has been incredible. This is just, I love talking to you. Again, this is the gift. And Steve gave this to all of you. So I really, when you are willing to show up fully, it's moments like this that people are longing for. I don't want the performer. I never wanted the performer with you, with anybody else. And I've started to recognize people don't want that with me either. And so for anybody listening to this, that connection maybe you felt to both of us learning how to take that off. For Steve to just, doesn't mean the questions go away, doesn't mean the pain goes away, but you release yourself from taking responsibility, from always having to do something with it and hold it and it being on you. And so I can't wait to have Steve back. I know everybody else is going to be excited for the next episode we do together. But for now, Steve, thank you so much. And listeners, I will see you here again next Sunday.
Thank you, Tara.